is a professor with Veritas Scholars University, and she's going to address us today on an issue that we've talked about, kind of came up before. It's an issue with textbooks, and she wants to talk about that to us a little bit today. She's also a member of our board of directors for the Reader Society of Creation. So as soon as she's ready to go here, we'll let her take off.
There it is.
Joel, thank you.
So am I audible? Yeah, okay. I'm very humbled, honored to get a chance to speak today. Thank you. So my objective is to argue that the use of non-Christian or secular publishers' textbooks in our schools is a means by which we are giving entrance to materialism in our schools, related to a notion integrating the faith. I think I'm pushing up against this. That I think is prevalent in the city. It's around my hair. So, to begin with, what is materialism? We've heard a lot about materialism. A synonym might be naturalism. I don't mean the philosophy of the person who buys the most toys wins. That's another definition of materialism. But rather, the philosophical commitment to the material world being all that there is, of time, space, energy, that's all there is. Or more broadly, I would say anybody who functions in their sphere, their discipline, as though, or feels compelled to function as though the material world is all there is. So broaden it a little bit. I have a map of the planet here showing the countries in the world that would have a state religion. And of course, our country does not. The reason I do this is we have this idea of separation of church and state that perhaps has gotten a little bit out of hand. Really, we understand it better with our Lutheran doctrine of two kingdoms, that we just don't want the church to wield the sword, except the sword of the Word of God. But it doesn't mean that we silence the church or silence the divine in all areas of questing for what is true. And so I think whether it's through public education that it's come, I don't know, but there certainly is this strong notion that to be a scientist, you have to function like a materialist. And I'm afraid that it also is in education, that to rightly educate in many subjects, you would have to be a materialist. I want to read in full this particular quote by, it's a fairly infamous quote by evolutionist Richard Lewontin, who's emeritus professor from Harvard, evolutionary biologist, and it illustrates what I mean by a toxic to truth, toxic materialism. So, Lewontin said, our willingness to accept scientific claims that are against common sense is the key to an understanding of the real struggle between science and the supernatural. We take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of its failure to fulfill many of its extravagant promises of health and life, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated, just-so stories, because we have a prior commitment to materialism. It's not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we're forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produce material explanations. No matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. Moreover, that materialism is absolute. We cannot allow a divine foot in the door. So, this is where the title comes, that perhaps we need the philosophy to not allow the materialism foot in the door. And materialism, I would assert, is anti-creation. So a couple months ago, we had a speaker here at the Denver Society of Creation meeting by the name of Dr. Randy Gugliuzza. His background is quite impressively varied, being by training and experience both an engineer, an MD, military background, and some theology training as well. His particular interest is to observe facets of sophisticated engineering manifested in creatures. So that's what he spoke to us about. But he said this rather obvious but seldom heard statement that evolution is anti-creation. Fairly simple, straightforward. He also said that we need to do biology as though Darwin never existed. So what did he mean by that? Well, he gave as an example this blind cave fish, for which any of us who've had a fair amount of Darwinism instruction would be able to create a terrific just so story to be present in almost any textbook about how the sight confers no advantage on this poor fish in the cave, and so a population of such fish in the cave, there would be a mutation that would come along. Fortunately, a germ-line mutation, so that it would be carried on, and it would lose its sight. And because that's more efficient, where you don't need your sight, that's an advantage, and the environment confers that, it selects this fish, and that's why the fish is blind. But it has absolutely nothing to do with natural selection, why this cave fish is blind. And this is what he pointed out, that instead, this fish, in its embryo form, in the egg, sensing the salinity of the water as indicative of being in a cave, genes switch off in real time in the embryo so that when it's hatched, it doesn't develop eyes. Nothing to do with natural selection, but a very sophisticated, predetermined response to nothing even to do with light, the salinity of cave water. So what, you say? What is the big deal if we have our story wrong in textbooks about why cave fish are blind? But we know the issues are much, much bigger. So much more is at stake. And so I quote Dr. Luther as an education reformer as well as reformer of the church, when he advises that no one send a child where the Holy Scriptures are not supreme. And every institution that is not unceasingly pursued the study of God's Word becomes corrupt. And he greatly fears the universities, unless they teach the Holy Scriptures diligently and press them on students, are wide gates of hell. And unfortunately, we've seen that this is in fact true for many secular university impact on young people. So my point here is that in education, in science, in every sphere there is, what matters is truth. Not materialism, not methodology, but truth. What is it that we are trying to find out? What are the bounds of truth that must constrain that inquiry? What are we passing on to students? And of course, the Scriptures are the norm for truth. And this is from the brief statement of the LCMS doctrinal position on the Holy Scriptures off the website. And it's the tail end of it that I have bolded to highlight, that we assert that the Scriptures are in all their parts and words infallible truth, also in those parts which treat historical, geographical, theological, biological, psychological, pick your logical, that where the Scripture refers to these matters, these secular matters, it is truth. And so this is our norm for teaching as we would all agree. But evolution is anti-scripture. As we've seen this, many of us have brought this up in the talks the past couple days. I have, as others before me have had, the genealogy showing that Adam and Eve traced down through, ultimately, of course, to Christ, the second Adam, and the whole understanding of the gospel is tied to this context of Scripture. For fun, I have the ossuary of Joseph Caiaphas, because he would have been a high priest, descended from Shem. And because I took that picture when we were in Jerusalem last summer, and so I had to include it. But there's another reason I included it. But of course, Romans 5:12, sin came into the world through one man, death through sin. So this, of course, is not only evolution being go forward and then backward. Not only evolution being anti-scriptures, of course, it's anti-gospel. And that's what we've talked so much about. And I have this picture, though I have not seen this painting in Istanbul. I was in Istanbul, I wish I'd seen it, but it's Christ pulling Adam and Eve out of their ossuary boxes. And it looks just like the ossuary box. I took a picture of it in the Jerusalem Museum, so that was pretty cool. But 1 Corinthians 15:21, this reminds us that since by man came death, by man came also the resurrection from the dead. So clearly we're speaking of physical death and resurrection as well as spiritual, since they're coupled together so plainly in our profession of the gospel. But backing up here a moment, Luther, again, our reformer of education, lamented how we handled education, and maybe we need to lament too. We do not see the pitiful evil how today young people of Christendom languish and perish miserably in our midst for want of the gospel. We would like to think as Lutheran educators we put the gospel prominently, but whenever we teach evolution, accidentally or deliberately, we're undermining that gospel. So this brings me over to this concept of integrating the faith. What does it mean to integrate the faith? Well, I have a few definitions for you. Combining two or more things so they work together effectively is probably the most useful definition of these three. I just had to throw on their operation of finding a function's antiderivative because I'm a calculus teacher. And I also have a manuscript of Augustine's City of God, because I don't think the thing we want to integrate is the city of man and the city of God. I don't think that's the objective of what we want to integrate if we're integrating the faith. So I got to thinking, what is being integrated with what? Well, we might want to integrate Christian faith with education, one model for that being classical Christian education. So I have this picture of the 7 liberal arts, the trivium and the quadrivium. That's one model. So faith and education, is that what we're integrating? Or the Bible with history, or science, or ethics, or health? I personally would say my goal with my students, with my own children, was to integrate Christianity into their mind, their heart, their life, so that it's the fabric of who they are, right? So then you set about to, what will best accomplish that. But unfortunately, from my experience in Lutheran education, it has come to mean in some circles, maybe broader, more narrow, depending on where, that we use secular textbooks in our Lutheran schools. This is supported by a piece from Prager's Handbook of Religion and Education in the United States, where Lutheran schools are described, and that they would resemble public schools in curriculum and school structure. Although textbooks are generally secular and commercial, some topics such as evolution in a science text would be reviewed critically, and Concordia Publishing does provide some textbooks that are specifically Lutheran, but with an LCMS slant, and I'll come back to those. So, where did this idea come from? Well, it has its roots in the between the wars era. A couple Supreme Court cases illustrate where this sort of compromise, almost fear response, I think, came from. And there was this dissociation from the German language between the wars, not surprisingly, and also this desire to be American, to speak English, go to public schools. And in fact, in Nebraska, there was a law that was passed that made it illegal to teach anything in any foreign language. And also not to teach foreign language at all below a certain age. And a Lutheran school teacher was caught teaching reading in German using the Bible. And he appealed and went to the Supreme Court and won. So this is a very significant case setting a precedent that foreign language is not forbidden, for one. A related case in Oregon where a law was passed that made any form of private education illegal, that all students had to be publicly educated. And the local Catholic society that had schools there, Society of Sisters, teamed up with a private military school, and they actually sued. In this case, they went to the Supreme Court, and the law was struck down. And it's for this reason that parochial education and homeschool education has so much freedom in this country. In Colorado, particularly, we have tremendous homeschool freedoms. But so this stemmed back, of course, to our Constitution, happily, where Congress cannot prohibit the free exercise of religion. And we're thankful for this. But it seems to me like, let's just go ahead and use secular curriculum, and they'll leave us alone. They won't shut our schools down. They don't have a fear of the government. We've talked that maybe we have reasons to fear the government again in the future, but is that what we operate by? Is that really how we should operate? And if we're not operating by fear, might we do better? And I would say I think we can. What makes an education Christian anyway? As I see it, I mean, up in the corner I've got a picture of a Gutenberg Bible, so that we understand that the Scripture is our norm for truth. But practically, in the classroom, you have two authorities: the written page, I've got the icon representing that, and the teacher. So you don't want to pit these authorities against one another. That's sort of at cross purposes. And truth should be the thing that you're aiming to convey. So I have Philippians 4:8 quoted there. So that's what makes an education Christian. Also, recognizing that truth has to be discriminated from falsehood. And so developmentally, according to the age of the child, we don't, maybe when they're young, we are careful to only show them those good things, but as they get older, we show them, by contrast, some of the untrue and unbeautiful and ungood things so that they can discriminate and become wise. That might be part of what makes a curriculum Christian, being aware of the age of the children. So, that being the case of these two authorities, you'd like them maybe to work together instead of being at cross purposes, if possible. And so I was in a position where I was trying to persuade faculty at a large Lutheran school in Texas to maybe consider getting Christian publishers. And in my mind, my naive mind, surely Christian teachers at Christian schools would want Christian textbooks. And just amazing the resistance that was met by that. It was myself and we had a school pastor, kind of an interesting idea at the time, and he was encouraging me in that. So the first objection I encountered, of course, is one that we have to dismiss. Christian textbooks are not necessary because we prefer to integrate the faith using secular textbooks like we always have done. So, let's just get out of the ditch, right? You don't need to be stuck in the 20s ditch. So maybe that one is all I have to say about. Another objection I encountered, and this is, I think, probably the most legitimate of them, is that many Christian publishers promote non-Lutheran theology. So it's better to use secular textbooks and avoid the theological conflict. So I guess it depends on whether your teachers are highly trained in their discipline, but maybe not qualified, or sonically trained, or the other way around. Ideally, they're both right, which just doesn't always work out that way. So do you want to undo an entire worldview, or do you want to undo problematic theology? It's really hard to say, but that's one objection. Well, let me just quickly show you the best I found for mine. We wanted a classical Christian education for our daughters for their high school years. And so we looked online to find that. I now teach for this school myself. And we found a series, a 6-year series, great books course, encompasses theology, literature, and history, and enormous reading lists. Half of these books are, the primary editor is Jean Edward Veith. Even though the school has some reform leanings, faculty, many of them are pastors from various denominations for these courses. So this is what we went with, knowing, from the reading list, and I have them reproduced in front of you. You'll be amazed at I'm not going to go through them in detail, but the books our children read in 7th grade, in 8th grade, in 9th grade, in 10th grade, in 11th grade, and in 12th grade, which included every book of the Bible as well. So this was a fabulous education, Christian textbooks, Christian teachers, but it's not for everyone. The classical model of education is not going to work for every student. It's, I'm not even pushing that in any specific way, just to say that there are some materials out there worth looking at, Christian publishers, but I don't know how they would fit into our Lutheran schools. So here's take 2. Many Christian publishers promote non-Lutheran theology, so it's better to use secular textbooks and thereby avoid the theological conflict. So I bring up Concordia Publishing House's Discovery Works, and these are still available. The copyright is getting a little old. They're science books for grades 1 through 6. CPH partnered with a secular textbook company to Lutheranize these secular books. And then that company was bought out by Houghton Mifflin, who didn't want to continue the project. And so they're not going to go into a reprinting. They're still the same cost as new books. What school is going to spend the money for new books when the copyright's $19.99? So, I'm glad they're there. I have a sample of a page from the 6th grade book, though this is posted on the web by Concordia. And I just want to put it up here because you have to remember that the person who wrote this textbook thought evolution was true. So even though it's been Lutheranized or Christianized, the author, the pictures and the dates and all, what's going to win you over on this page if you're the child, whereas the black text up above asserts what we believe, certainly from the Bible. But you can do better. If you write a textbook, the author's writing the truth as they believe to be the truth. I think you get a better product. But still, this is way better than nothing. It has nice words in it like some scientists think, or as opposed to all scientists think, or things like that. So it's definitely an improvement, but it's already outdated. So it's not really a future resource. A publisher I think very highly of the science textbooks for is Bob Jones University Press. These are what I advocated for at the school in Texas. They're written from the ground up with the purpose embedding apologetics as well as teaching science. They're very good textbooks. They have chapters in them like Science and Faith, the Christian Worldview and Science, Right and Wrong Science, and beautifully illustrated, hardback, they should last. I think 12 of them. But they're not Lutheran, right? So there's going to be some problematic theology. Though I didn't really encounter a lot when I used them. Moving on, objection number 3. The Christian publisher recommended is associated with an institution that has some questionable policies in the past, making the use of this publisher potentially offensive to some of our families. This was the previous publisher I just mentioned for which this objection was raised. I thought it was a bit of a stretch, but you know, our whole country has questionable practices in the past that we'd like to dissociate from. This is the 13th Amendment when we figured out to abolish slavery. But nonetheless, maybe there would be some to object because of historical practices of an institution that publishes textbooks. But anyway, that was an objection. But here is an unspoken objection I know was present, that I'm a theistic evolutionist, so naturally I do not want to use Christian textbooks that affirm a 6-day recent creation, but I will admit this. Let's see what objection will I adopt. There was even one objection that who needs textbooks at all, but I'm not going to go even give that one any time. So I return to the statement already has been posted from our brief statement, doctrinal position on creation, to highlight. You know, I've always felt like it's a matter of integrity that any institution you teach for, you're going to teach in accordance with the position of that institution. Ideally, you also believe it, of course, but that we reject every doctrine which denies or limits the work of creation as taught in Scripture, etc. So, but what subjects are affected by creation doctrine where we might be concerned about textbooks? Well, I would assert health is one. Sex ed. We have Colorado House Bill 1032 working its way through things right now where a curriculum mandated for the public schools with the LGBTQ ideas and also even the necessity of the validation of abortion written into the curriculum. I hope it fails, I hope it fails, I hope it fails. But do we want to use secular curriculum in this case? I would say not. So here we see an obvious place where creation doctrine affects another subject besides science. Obviously biology, earth and space science, which is getting taught in 5th and 6th grade before students have even had chemistry or physics to be able to begin to be equipped to evaluate. It's like having the quadrivium before the trivium, if you're familiar with classical education notions. But anyway, those are fields that are certainly affected. History, social studies, obviously. Government, right? Don't we claim that all men are created equal, that these truths are self-evident, that they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights? So government is certainly one affected. Psychology, I would argue, maybe needs to be done as though Freud never existed also. Grammar, are we going to really start teaching pronoun confusion to our younger children when gender is so ubiquitous, even in foreign language that we study? You know, literature, that's profoundly affected by omission of any books that would be Christian. C.S. Lewis, for example. Fabulous literature that wouldn't get included. And then what about neutral subjects like math? You say, who cares about math? Well, so here I pulled off the web the covers of 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade math, McGraw-Hill education. And I think it's great that the diversity of people who comprise Americans are illustrated. We're very equitable. We've got 2 gals, we've got 2 guys, we've got some different hues of skin represented. We'd all applaud that. That's great. But where is it going? What's the new diversity going to look like? So that the pictures, even in math textbooks, are promoting genderlessness, or pictures of families in the books. What do those look like? So the question might really be what subjects are not affected by creation doctrine. So I have a riddle to solve. I put this out there. Help me with this. What organization has multiple universities full of expertise across many disciplines, including education, with Lutheran Christian faculty who can surely author and edit good and godly creation textbooks without problematic doctrine? What organization has a publishing house, oops, I shouldn't have said Concordia, to generate and distribute these textbooks? What organization also has its own grade schools and high schools to provide a market base? Please, let's join. There's so much need for Christian worldview textbooks across all subjects that are high in quality. There are some out there. There's room for more. We're equipped to do it uniquely. And just as an example of the potential impact one person can have, Dr. Jay Weil, he started an organization, Apologia. He's since left it and has another organization. He teaches nuclear chemistry at a small liberal arts school in Indiana. He's written textbooks in biology, chemistry, advanced chemistry, physics, advanced physics, marine biology. One man, widely used, because he wrote them to homeschoolers, widely used among homeschoolers, enormous impact. But the books, they're not as suited to a classroom as might be ideal. And he also doesn't take too much of an apologetics approach. It's more of a, let's make certain we don't say anything in error. But it's not, so in that sphere, I would love to see something more along the line of Bob Jones University Press that is more apologetics in its teaching, at least in science. But anyway, one person could do so much. Who can be tapped on the shoulders to write textbooks? I was tapped on the shoulder by Veritas Press a couple of years ago, but I couldn't write their physics textbooks, and they've given it up because they're bogged down, because they're not a university. They do have a publishing house. but things get bogged down, and we maybe have some resources to share beyond the impact could be enormous. Homeschool world, as well as the Lutheran schools, as well as other Christian schools. But what are we afraid of? Well, I pointed out that we have fear of the government historically. It's been pointed out by the previous speaker. We have reason to fear government going forward, potentially. But why do I have pizza? What's pizza have to do with it? Okay, let me tell you the pizza story. So, at the school I taught, the Lutheran school I taught at in Houston, in order to get government money for the lunchroom, which of course is spread across the whole school because it's one budget, but anyway, for the lunchroom we had to comply with not too much fat in the meals. There had to be a certain fat content. So it actually counted the number of pepperonis you could have on your slice of pizza. But if the student was still hungry and wanted seconds for pizza, the lunch ladies could not give them more pizza because that would tilt their meal out of, the right proportion of fat. So what would they tell them to do? Go out in the hall and have a machine with ice cream and potato chips. Okay. So this is laughable. This is silly. But other things that get tied to government money are things like using our public sex ed, health curriculum, right? That is a very scary thought. So maybe we should be afraid of the government money more than we're afraid of the government. And academia, are we afraid of academia? I found this painting of the Mockery of the Owl based on some poem that I have to go read, some medieval poem now, but I probably can't read it because it's in Old English or something. But just a reminder that there's that pressure always to not want to be made fun of, right? That nobody wants to be mocked. And the young earth position is one that receives a fair amount of it. And so that's what I say of that. Commit it to ourselves. We want to be thought well of. But maybe the main thing we should be afraid of is losing our children. And so shutting the door on materialism is highly desirable, and one way that we can maybe shut it out a little bit is to make sure the materials we put in our children's hands are in fact teaching truth, creation truth in all disciplines. So that is, I think, all I have to say, because I think I'm not going to say anything about that. Okay.
How about you read the verse on the bottom?
Okay, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Thank you, Don. So, that is what I have to share today.
Thank you so much, Barbara. We appreciate it. Thanks so much. And Barbara has been wonderful on our board of directors too. I just want to make that comment. So we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we're going to get